Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
Salvation.
Goeiedag, good day, Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Goeiedag.
All over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. There's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard. There's a lot of things that can tear you apart. I know the road sometimes feel lonely, but remember you're not the one and only.
Goeienaand, good evening fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Now, before I introduce tonight's live stream, now that the dust has settled with a certain Mr. Wyatt, I just want to make a simple observation. My attention was drawn to the fact that Wyatt was denigrating loving life in recent days while talking to people in live streams. 2 interviews at least that I know of. My video outing Wyatt as a Central Intelligence Agency operative was simply a response to his defamatory comments about my platform, and it was about time people knew the truth. Now Wyatt is acting like a spoiled 5-year-old who's lost his favorite marble. So sad. Hardly the demeanor of a colonel, one would think. Perhaps he's lost all his marbles. You know what? He can dish out the insults, but cannot cop the truth. Anyway, this is my last word on this matter. Tonight I'm talking to Hans Combrink in part 2 of his fascinating insight into the 2 cultural factions, Afrikaners and Boers. In part 2 we largely cover the period from the Boer War to 1994. And please note, because of dreaded load shedding, this live stream is pre-recorded. In fact, we had to do 2 recordings due to load shedding. So please excuse a slight disconnect in the conversation when we restart a separate recording. Anyway, here we go. Enjoy. I'm sure you'll find it quite fascinating. How are you?
I'm in fun.
Sorry guys, I'm just going to use another video platform for this. I'm going to use that one. There we go.
How are you? I'm in fun, thanks. We're just sitting in the dark again, but apart from that, we're keeping our heads above water and staying positive.
Look, I have to tell you that my live stream last night with Dr. Peter Hammond we were 40 minutes into that live stream, and it got interrupted. I don't have to tell you why, but it got interrupted. So Peter and I are going to be doing a separate recording, which will go on to the introduction. But yeah, we know all about load shedding in South Africa. It's a complete and utter disaster.
I'm just checking my battery, and hopefully it lasts for an hour, because in an hour's time the power will be back again, so hopefully we would not have to be interrupted as well. And there's another effect, just for interest, I know Reverend Peter.
Yeah, he's a lovely man. He's one of our channel heroes. We've got about 15 channel heroes in Loving Life, and that's probably about 2 a year that we announced. And you know, he is a giant in South African history, and so underrated. So
yes, underrated, and not well known.
Well, he is very well known amongst the Loving Life community, and very
amongst the right people, but not generally.
Yeah, I agree.
We haven't got a voice. That's a problem.
Yeah. Now,
in terms of media.
Yeah, well, look, the fake mainstream media. What do you expect? Let's forget about the media. Let's get into our discussion tonight, and you know, with part 1, which I will link down below this video so people can go and have a look at it. We concentrated on part 1 was actually supposed to be the whole story, but we got so involved that we've now decided to do 2 parts. And part 1 was about how where the Boers went, and how the Nguni people came through, the Bantu people came through. And I want to move on from that now to a totally different level, because when we talk about cultural differences in South Africa, what people around the world do not understand is that there is a huge and growing chasm between 2 original white groups that came in 1652 with Jan van Riebeeck, and we're talking about the Afrikaners and the Boers. Do you want to just tell us how this has happened? Let's go through the history of that, how that's happened. I've got a graphic here I'll put up while you're actually talking about it.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Again, thank you very much for having me on your live stream. To me, it's just a privilege to attempt to bring the real story of a Boer into context, and also the Afrikaner, for their sake. As we all know, history is normally very one-sided, and it's written by a conqueror. And it is normally a matter of your version, my version, and somewhere in between lies the truth. My intention is not at all to place a halo, to place a halo around the head of the Boer nation, but rather to put the records straight and to get a perspective on the outside world's perception of the Boer, who has always been seen and considered as being the scoundrels here on the southern tip of Africa. And since the start of the organized living in South Africa in 1652, there was racial, ethnic, and ideological friction, and it's always been very controversial. I think the main reasons being the strategic and economical value of the region, and also other reasons, of course. There will always be a battle for control of this land, and history has been the central theme in playing around with tragedy by our enemies in bringing the Boers rightly and hard-earned land. The history has been distorted, and a skewed picture has been painted. And I think it's high time now that we rectify that picture, or at least attempt to that, and to get closer to the truth. I just want to do a few corrections. During part 1, as I listened to watch the live stream later on, I came upon a few mistakes which I made. I just want to rectify that. I mentioned that Cleopatra visited King Solomon's mines in Namatapa, as it was called at that time. It wasn't Cleopatra, it was the Queen of Sheba. I just want to rectify that one. And I said Mutsunikatsi Kumalo was a lieutenant of Dingane, well it was actually a lieutenant of King Shaka. And the third mistake which I picked up was I said we never made war against the Sutu, which was not really correct. We never made war with the Western Sutu called the Tswana. We were never in any conflict with the Western Sutu. In fact, they assisted us in chasing Mutsunikatsi Kumalo and his Mapaburi to the Zimbabwe. We actually made war against the Basutu, which were the people of King Washwashwe from the Sutu, and also were the Paburi, the Northern Sutu. I just wanted to make those corrections.
Not a problem. So
if you sorry.
Yeah, look, I'm actually going to share the screen with you just so you can see what I'm going to share with everybody. Hang on, give me a second. I'm just going to do that. Oh gosh, you gotta love it when it doesn't work properly. There we are. Now we're working. Okay. Let me know when you can see that page.
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. Now, this is really pivotal to understanding the difference between the Afrikaner. Are very much at loggerheads, aren't they?
Yes, I think that's a really effective manner in describing that. They went different routes. And they all came on the same ships. There was no distinction between them from the start. So if you look at phase 1, 1600 to 1700s, they settled as one group at start, the officials, and by then they were just laborers. They were not really farmers yet. As we all know, that the intention of the Dutch was never to establish a nation or to come here as a nation, as an extension of a Dutch nation. It was just, the aim was just to establish a refreshment station for the ships going around to the east for trading. So that was what happened at the start. They started their organization here. And later on, and that was in the 1700s to 1800s, they also decide, because of the fertile land, they decide to start farming. So some of those, let's say, laborers, which were regional farmers from Europe, they had the skills, so they decided to start small farming. And that's when the second phase started to develop and to deploy. When they called it, there was a name for them, they called them Vryburgers, and they had like Vryburgers, and they allocated small pieces of land for them to start farming, and that would support the refreshment station. I heard you saying you were asking something. Did you want to ask a question at this stage?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just listening, yeah.
So if you look at the size, that was a Proto-Afrikaner and that was a Proto-Boer.
Right.
That was originally the case. So as these farmers started moving to their farms, the separation started. And it clearly manifested later on what the real differences were between these two groups.
Right.
So there was some polarization at that stage. These people developed a mutual feeling that they belong together, they were one group, and opposing eventually the authorities of the Dutch government, the Dutch authorities at the Cape. And later on, we also know, as we discussed in the first part, a person of the name of Arantas, who actually came in, we started protesting against the corruption, especially of the then Dutch governor, Adrian van der Stel.
Right.
So then the friction started and the conflict started between the two groups, and they separated more and more after that. In phase 3, that was the 1800s and towards the 1900s, when they started moving, as we know, we discussed in the first part, the track boers, as they were called.
Yeah.
They moved towards the east, and they started, we were more, amongst other. There was the republics of Swellendam and Graaff-Reinet, and they just separated in a more serious manner after that. That was just the start of it, and it eventually culminated in the Great Track. It really started in 1834 with the freeing of the slaves. So by then, this proto-Afrikaner was called Cape Dutch, and the term boer, the name boer, became prominent as well.
And they were the Voortrekkers.
Yeah, the boers, they were originally called the track boers, and then they were start of the Great Track, and since then they were called Voortrekkers. There's a lot of arguments about that as well, but I think it's safe to stay with that terminology at this stage in time.
Yeah.
Track boers became Voortrekkers, and eventually, during the Boer War, or the Free Boer Wars, the name changed to Boer. So that was a sequence of events to get to the name, to the term Boer.
Right.
So what happened? I just want to read a few bullet points on what really, just to summarize part 1. The Europeans coming to South Africa consisted mainly of Dutch and Germans, and there were also Scandinavian people, Swiss people, but that was the main group, more or less in the same percentage, a little bit more Dutch than German. There was confusion about German people coming to South Africa as they all came via Holland. It was, like we discussed in the first part, it was a very wealthy period for the Dutch, of the VOC, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company.
A lot of those people were basically Reformation Christians. They were moving away from the Catholic Church, and they were coming to South Africa to escape.
They were mainly Protestant, and in a later discussion, I would also like to discuss that being part of a church, which was unfortunate because of the role of the early churches, which
well, we'll get into that a bit later.
Not supposed to be, but that culminated at a later stage. At that stage, we were just members of the Dutch Reformed Church, mainly, and they were part of a church setup and structure, and they fled for their religious beliefs. They were oppressed by the Roman Catholics in Germany. So they all came together and they came to settle at the Cape. They did not come on separate ships. So, for instance, ships for Afrikaners and a ship for Boers. So that would manifestate later for them actually to discover and to identify and realize that there are real differences between them in terms of ideology and values mainly. The differences between Afrikaner became apparent very soon after, and as I mentioned before, especially when the Vryburgers were formed, and they started farming their pieces of land which were allocated to them. The Cape Dutch took the side of the Dutch rulers, and later they took the side of the British. They were always on the side of the authorities and the Germans.
Hans, can I just ask you whether I'm correct in suggesting that the Voortrekkers and the Boers were largely the Afrikaners who basically left the Western Cape and moved up into the Eastern Cape towards a place called Grahamstown, which was right on the border where the Xhosa were, where you had the different wars, whereas the Afrikaners stayed in the Western Cape.
I think that's a safe way of defining that, describing that.
Yeah.
They were all, whenever this distinction came about and became clear, it's debatable, but eventually that it manifested in what we have today, two different groups.
Right.
It developed gradually, but very, very much distinct. There was a clear description as we follow this diagram. It's actually very clear how things developed.
Okay, so we're now moving to the 1800 to the 1900s. We've covered all the tribal wars with the Afrikaners. We've covered Blood River. We've covered all that in part one. So let's move on to the Second Boer War, and this is a huge area of conflict because many of the Cape Afrikaners. Okay, guys, that is the end of the first segment. I do apologize for the sound. I know it's not perfect, but Hans did have a bit of an echo in his room. I think this has actually been recorded in a different room, so hopefully you will hear Hans much better. This is the main recording for tonight's live stream. Here we go. Let's hold thumbs and hope it works properly. Okay. Let me just get it up. There we go. I love it, haven't we?
Yeah, no, it's true. The situation is a bit awkward. It's getting worse in South Africa.
Yeah.
But we are very fortunate this morning that the load shedding has been early in the morning, so as from 7 or as from 6 o'clock actually, it's fine. So I'm on to Wi-Fi.
You've got a couple of hours of electricity, is what you're saying.
Yeah, at least until midday.
Yeah. Now, Hans,
yeah, we're fine until midday.
We had part one, and we're looking at part two, and we're talking about now moving into the time close to the 1900s. And the first major event that happened was the Jameson raid, where Cecil Rhodes tried to use his mates to basically take over the Transvaal, and that came horribly and stuck near a place called Krugersdorp, didn't it?
Correct, yes. There's in the outskirts of Krugersdorp, there's a little monument there marking the place where Star Jameson was forced to surrender. And some fact of interest, Joppie Fourie, the martyr, Joppie Fourie was shot by Jannie Smuts. He was the one writing the letter, actually, for Jameson to sign, to surrender.
Okay.
Well, yeah, Joppie Fourie was the guy. When he was shot, Joppie Fourie said, Star Jameson received mercy, and he really did something wrong. He was invading a country, and he was just defending his rights as a Boer. He had to be shot. He had to be executed. Very ironic. Mm. Well, this shows you we talked about the difference between Boers and Afrikaners and all that. That shows you the nature of an Afrikaner. Paul Kruger had all the right. He was sentenced to death to get him executed, and he showed mercy. Mm. But an Afrikaner like Jannie Smuts, he didn't show mercy to Joppie Fourie.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I want to point out as being the real difference between Boer and Afrikaner. It's best to do it by way of real examples in real life, true life events.
Absolutely, and it's tragic that you've now got this divide between the two groups. But okay, so let's move on.
I think that people are accusing us when we discuss these things, and it's only discussion. It's only scrutinizing the situation in the past and the present. It's actually just what we observe. That's not what we cause. That came a long way. I think we can trace it back to the biblical times from Cain and Abel, their descendants. It's not us causing the division between the groups. We just identifying it and try to understand it and to discuss it.
Absolutely. And look, let's move on to 1902. Okay, so what actually happened between the first Boer War, which was the one with the Jameson raid? Well, there was actually that one in KwaZulu-Natal as well. But if we go into 1900 to 1902, or 1899 to 1902, the Rothschilds were basically pushing for the British government to annex and take over the Witwatersrand because there was a huge gold bounty in what is now called the city of Johannesburg, or near the city of Johannesburg. And that was the actual foundation of the city of Johannesburg, was gold being found there. Now, the difference between the Boers and the Afrikaners, if I get this right, is that all the Boers wanted to do, who actually they legally owned the territory of the Free State and the Transvaal, was to farm. They weren't into mining, they weren't into gold, all they wanted to do was farm, have their lifestyle and so on. But that was horribly interrupted in 1899. Tell us what happened.
See, we go back to history a little bit further back, and I think we also discussed that, is that the intention of the British was, as from the start, they pretended to send missionaries, and I don't want to say they were not at all honest in that, but the main goal was to find the gold of Monomotapa. So they were looking for gold all the time. And well, it actually transpired like that, and there's a lot of proof of it. And as they carry along, and they found these Boers with a different agenda, being a nuisance to them all the time in terms of their goals, they eventually attempted to force down their will and what they are after. If you look at the two Boer republics, the Free State and Transvaal, the ZAR, the British did not really accept these people occupying this land. There were attempts all along, as from the early 1840s, to interfere with the Free State government and also with the ZAR. And eventually there were two conventions, the Zand River Santrifuge Convention and also the Bloemfontein Convention, in which they accepted, well, almost totally controlled by the Boers of these areas. But in 1877 again, I think, they annexed the Transvaal. So it showed that the intentions were not really pure, which in that annexation of Transvaal in 1877 eventually led to the Second Freedom War, which ended at the Battle of Amajuba. So now, during the late
just to be clear, at Amajuba, the British were horribly defeated.
Humiliated, actually.
Humiliated. They were completely decimated.
Totally, that was maybe the first real battle in which they were humiliated like that. And they certainly wanted revenge after that.
Yeah.
And that even, that loss at the Battle of Amajuba it actually led to peace talks. They were forced into peace talks. They didn't even, there were a couple of battles preceding that, and that was the last straw. They were totally defeated, and they realized that. And they accepted the terms of the peace talks, and the Boers were allowed to govern themselves, partially, but it's only the foreign affairs which were still controlled by the British.
Now, Hans,
so
just to be clear on this,
just to be clear on this,
with that first Boer War, where the British were horribly defeated, were the Afrikaners from the Western Cape forming part of their army, or was it only in the 1900 Boer War?
I was thinking about that all along. It's not for me to say that there was no Afrikaner involved. But it's very unlikely because they didn't move along with the Boers. They also actually, let's see, they've been hostile to the Boers, like the British were in moving, and it's very unlikely. There could have been a few Afrikaners, which proved later on in the Anglo-Boer War when we got these guys we called joiners. So eventually they decided, no, we would rather fight on the side of the British. So those people might have been Afrikaners or double-hearted people, not really fully convinced that they were Boers. It's difficult to say, but I think it's very unlikely that full-blooded Afrikaners, like if you look at the diagram again later on, who were called Cape Dutch, it's very unlikely that they were part of or significantly part of a great trek, of a trek Boers and the great trek.
Yeah.
So I doubt that there could be any full-blooded Afrikaners.
Okay, but that all changed with the Second Boer War, didn't it? Because a lot of the you just lost something, have you?
Yeah, I kicked something and some bottles dropped, but sorry for that noise, but it's
because we got electricity so that we can still hear and see you. Now, okay, so I've just shared that. I've just shared that graphic very briefly about the proto-Afrikaner, the proto-Boer.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to 1902. What changed? Because a lot of the people...
1899.
A lot of the people who joined the British were actually Afrikaners in the Western Cape to actually go and fight their own people, the Boers.
Yeah, you see, it's difficult for me to say it's their own people because it was supposed to be, but it developed like that, and we realize now that it was not really their own people, although we speak the same language to a certain extent. There are also differences which very few people are aware of between the way the Boers speak Afrikaans and the Afrikaners speak Afrikaans and the colored people speak Afrikaans. So that's the main common ground, is the same language. In a certain way also the same culture, but not really. So we were not actually traitors against their own people. I won't like to say that, because they were enemies as from the start. But people do not want to recognize that fact and to admit it. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. So during the late 1890s, gold was found in the ZAR, as we all know, in Johannesburg area, and that lured many foreigners and led to a serious threat as the British were interested in the minerals of South Africa as from the beginning, as I mentioned. And it was actually used as a smokescreen by Lord Norman at the time. He was already in control from the British side in South Africa. And he used these Uitlanders, as we call it, the foreigners, and their rights as a smokescreen to put pressure on Paul Kruger to allow them certain rights. And Paul Kruger rightly realized, and that's why when he walked out in Pretoria from a meeting with Lord Milner, he said, it's not the right to vote you are after, but my country. I think that's a very well-known quote from Paul Kruger. So he realized what was going on. He realized all the way it was all about the gold eventually, and they were pressing him for terms, and he actually allowed a lot. He was very lenient, as a matter of fact, but eventually he realized that's what they're after, and they will not settle for second prize. They will just settle for first prize eventually as a country, because now they knew, and they were after the gold all the time. And now this huge rich discoveries were made, and so now they were going for it full blast. They knew what their target was, and they would not stop until they achieved it. And that's what eventually happened. They started the Boer War. Although they thought it would be over by Christmas, it lasted almost 3 years.
Now look, just talking about the Boer War, that's when your Nguni and Bantu people started becoming involved. And as I understand it, the Bantu and the Nguni people actually fought alongside the Boers because they realized that the British were just trying to take over their country. And when it came to the British side, the Bantu and Nguni people were treated almost like slaves. They were not treated very well, were they?
Yeah, we like to accuse in those times, especially, and even now, when we look back into the history, they like to accuse the Boers of treating the black people badly. Let me just make it clear: the Bantu consists of Nguni, that's the one main group, which is the Xhosa, the Zulu, the Swazi, the Matabele, Chonga, and Pondo. And if you look at the Sotho, that's the other large group. Right. That's the Western Sotho, the Pere of Northern Sotho, and the Basotho of Lesotho. And then there's a small splinter group called Venda, which actually originated from the Shona.
Right.
Now, there was also division amongst the black. I would say because lots of these Bantu people worked on the Boer farms. So I would say they were mostly on the side of Boers.
Yes.
It depended on the region as well. In the Transvaal and the Free State, they were mostly on the side of the Boers, I would say, and more towards the Cape, who was always more intended towards the British, the white people, the Afrikaners, Cape Dutch, and also the black people in the regions. They were actually inclined mostly to the British. And that is why there were a couple, well, maybe 1,000 or so, maybe a little bit less than that, black people in uniform who fought on the side of the British, alongside with the Afrikaners, who also fought in the uniform of the British. And the fact of interest, after the Boer War, as early as 1912, the original ANC was founded. It was called the African National Council. And that was actually influenced and driven by the British. They assisted these people now to form this political party to oppose the Boers. And later on it changed to the African National Congress as it is known today.
Now one of the major players on the British side was Lord Milner, who was a nasty piece of work. He was a guy, I believe, who was involved in setting up all these concentration camps where the Boer women and children were basically put in these horrific camps. And Emily Hobhouse, a few years later, went over to South Africa and actually exposed what had been going on. And that was the first time, recorded time, I think, that this sort of treatment had ever been dished out to prisoners of war.
Yeah, the scorched earth policy, and which went alongside with the concentration camps. Lord Milner, he had a passion to hate the Boers. He really wanted to destroy the Boers. For what reason, nobody would ever know. He was also partially German. He was like a British German crossbred. And it's actually very strange that he had so much hatred against the Boers. I could not get to the core of it, and I could never understand why. He was actually cooperating with Lord Kitchener as well. Was more instrumental on the military side. And Roberts, I'm not sure if it was Lord Roberts, he was also involved in the concentration camps. And another fact of interest is that Hitler also, he was aware of these concentration camps as he was a child, and later on that was a model on which he, apparently there's a lot of controversial discussions on that as well. People differ about the facts, but apparently Hitler also used these concentration camps in South Africa as a model for his camps in Poland and the other camps which were erected to keep the Germans, apologies, to keep the Jews. That's the point of interest.
Yeah. Now look, when we talk about the Boer War, the second one, 1899 to 1902, there's a fellow that I've talked to a few times, an amazing guy who's been out to that little island in the middle of the Atlantic where they took the Boers and incarcerated them. His name is Saint Helena, yeah. His name is Rudy Rousseau. And Rudy, have you heard of Rudy?
I know Rudy in person, yes. He's doing all the investigation, and he found a lot of hidden information on the concentration camp, which was never really revealed. He's doing a great job on that. I know exactly what he's doing.
He's an amazing guy. I just wanted to bring up his name because, to me, he's one of those people who digs down and actually gets to the truth that's been covered up. And there's one person, Hans, to me, was the enigma when it came to going back to 1900, the Second Boer War, that period, and that is Jan Smuts. Because Jan Smuts was from the Western Cape. He was an Afrikaner, and he basically sided with the British. And it's interesting because at that time you had the prophet Sina van Rensburg, who often in his writings talks about Smuts. He talks about what's happening in South Africa at the time. Have you got any thoughts on that?
On Jan Smuts per se?
And Sina van Rensburg.
Yeah, we can go there. If I can request that I start in a chronological sequence and discuss all these Afrikaner politics post-World War. Can we do that, or do we not have enough time for that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, just shortly after the Boer War, which ended in 1902, Lord Milner established what was called the kindergarten government, because it was actually made, he assembled a couple of very young politicians, for what reason I don't know, in the Cape, with the aid of Kitchener as well. And the Boer was conquered, wounded, although not totally beaten, and overwhelmed. For almost 3 years, it was like a world war against a handful of Boers. I'm referring to the Boer War now.
Yeah.
The Citizens' Army against joint forces under the joint forces under the British flag, like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Scotland. Well, that was the United Kingdom, Scotland, and the Irish also joined. Although some of them also joined us, but very few, only small numbers.
Yeah.
And some Germans assisted the Boers, some Russians, Dutch, and also Irish, like I mentioned, and even Scandinavian people, but in very small numbers. So it was literally the whole outside Western world against a citizens' army, a small army of Boers of not more than 50,000 soldiers. It's a known fact that when the British realized that it was going to be very difficult to defeat the Boers with purely military methods, they started their scorched earth policy, whereby Boer women and children were forced into concentration camps. Like you said, Rudy Rousseau is investigating and doing a very good job on that, and revealing a lot of hidden facts and history, like you mentioned. Before they were sent to the concentration camps, their farms were destroyed. They burned down the houses, killed all the livestock, so that they could not support the fighting men in the field anymore. Then, at the end of the World War, the Treaty of Vereniging was signed on 31st of May. It's actually today, if I'm not. That's also Republic Day for South Africa. That treaty was signed 31st of May 1902. That ended the war between the ZAR, the Orange Free State, and the British. And this settlement provided the end of hostilities and even some partial self-government to the Transvaal and Orange Free State. the Boer republics agreed to come under the sovereignty of the British Crown, and the British government agreed on various details. The Boer nation was devastated at the time. Those who refused to lay down the oath to subject themselves to the British were sent to St. Helena and also to India, some of them, in exile, where many of them also died. They never returned, and some refused to return. They did not want to live under the British authority. The ones who accepted the conditions of Britain after the war and took the oath as well, as also the ones who returned from St. Helena alive, suffered under many severe circumstances and conditions. You can imagine they had nothing left, everything was destroyed. They were in exile, they couldn't develop themselves in those days, so they returned to literally nothing. And some were granted compensation, but under the conditions they had to travel to England to collect it. Now you can imagine, the person who's got nothing, how on earth can they were just not able to travel, so it literally means that they did not receive anything. Practically, it meant, like I'm saying, that they received nothing. They were really exhausted after the Boer War. The farms were stolen, also the Afrikaners, because then the opportunistic nature of the Afrikaner came to the surface. They took those farms. Many of the farms, I won't say all, but many of these farms were literally stolen from the Boers. The Afrikaners took control of those farms, and people studying these farm murders, which is taking place, has been taking place for a couple of decades in South Africa, and they say there's proof that these, like they say, is actually just agricultural people. They're not truly Boers, and most of these people being killed, they say that's the curse of God now. That's what's happening to them because they stole these farms from the Boers, and they are getting killed on those farms. It makes a lot of sense. So it's not really the Boers who are getting killed, but farmers who are not Boers at all. This for a point of interest because that is what happened to people who did not act in an honest manner, and they stole these farms from the devastated Boers.
Right.
Since 1902, with instating this kindergarten government, the Boers were stripped from any political power as well. Not that they were really much into politics, but they had literally no political power after the Boer War. The political power which they had some limited political power during the republics of even Natalia, which was already taken away from them in early 1840s. When the British took control, they won the battle at Kongela. That's close to Durban at the Bluff. That's more or less where that battle took place, and I consider that as the first Boer War. The second Boer War was the one which ended at 1881 at Amajuba, and the third Boer War. People differ with that, but they were really, in fact, they were freedom wars.
Right.
And the last one, Anglo-Boer War, which ended in 1902. And since then, the Boers had no political power at all. What happened, as the Boers were moving to the east, northeast, like we mentioned before, they were called track Boers. They established the republics of Swellendam and Graaf-Reinet, for instance. And then after that, the Groot Trek took place. The Afrikaner and the British were gradually losing control over the Boers, and they did not want that. Can I ask you just to place the diagram again?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll just share it with you as well. Let me just share it with you. And then you can just refer exactly. Okay, I'm going to put that up so everybody can see it. There it is. Okay.
It makes more sense when we look at that diagram.
Yeah.
And now it will be depicting what I'm discussing, so people can follow and see what's actually which actually went and is still going on. So this kindergarten government, from which was instated by Lord Milner, was meant to, like, in a way, dominate the Boer, to show them the way in which the British would like South Africa to be governed and controlled.
Right.
At the time there were Afrikaner parties. Well, I call it Afrikaner parties because there was no political home to any Boer, in fact. And there were 4 parties in each of the provinces. There were a political party representing the Afrikaners. The ones in the Cape, in Natal, I can't recall what the names were. In the Transvaal, there was this political party called Het Volk. And in the Orange Free State, it was Oranje. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. Oranje or Oranje. It relates to the Orange Free State.
Right.
In any case. And this kindergarten government steered the political control towards Afrikaner domination. And that culminated in the Union of South Africa in 1910. When the ex-Boer General Louis Botha became the Prime Minister. And as a matter of fact, he also cheated the person who was really supposed to be the Prime Minister, John X. Merriman. He was supposed to become the Prime Minister, but he was cheated by manipulating the areas in which the votes were casted. It's something which I picked up in the book I read as well.
Right.
So even that wasn't even done honestly. John X. Merriman was supposed to be the Prime Minister, and Louis Botha was
just to be clear, right up to 1910, the British effectively controlled Southern Africa. And then after 1910, you then had the Afrikaners taking over control up until 1994. So 1910 is a pivotal year, isn't it?
Exactly, yes. That's where the Afrikaners start taking control, but they got the Boer to believe that they were also part of it, which we were not, because the strategy was all the time to dominate the Boer and to actually wipe them out gradually, so that the existence, and that's why we wanted to combine, they say Afrikaner and Boer are the same. That is where it comes in, and unfortunately the Boers were not, I don't know how to put it, I won't say intelligent enough, but they were not sharp enough. They did not realize.
They were too innocent. I think the operative word here is that the Boers were children of God. I mean, they had nagmaals, and they had the whole social structure rotated around the church. Whereas I think the Afrikaners had a slightly different focus, which is about how can I make money out of what I'm doing, and that was the last thing on the radar of the Boers, who basically were just trying to raise a family and live the life of freedom.
They just wanted to live godly, peaceful lives.
Exactly.
And they were mainly farmers.
Yeah.
We lived from the land. You're quite right. I think you've got a very good description and viewpoint on that. That's exactly what the value is different. Like I said before, ideologies, values. It's a state of heart, and that's what's the difference. And by means of politics and church, which we'll describe later, you said that the Boers were very involved in churches, and that was one of their biggest mistakes. Being involved, they were very seriously religious, but this is also a point of discussion of what actually happened at the Battle of Blood River and Bevel. They were supposed to be out of the church by then. Charles Sevier was actually rejected, and the Great Tract was not supported by the church.
Yeah.
They actually criticized it all the way. So that's another point of discussion. I just want to make that clear.
Sure.
We should rather say the Boers were very, very seriously religious, and the Afrikaners were more involved into churches and politics.
Yeah.
And that's why they've been dominating the Boers all along. And the Boers have been battling to get out of this grip, but they did not really understand what was going on, and that is the core of the problem. That is the biggest problem with the Boer. They do not understand and realize what is going on. I would call it naive. I think that's the best description. So the idea was that Boers as a political force was destroyed, and they would, as far as from then on, take on the identity of Afrikaner. The British made sure that kindergarten government steered the situation with Botha and Smuts taking the lead. And in 1910, they thought the situation was ready to carry on with that tragedy. The spirit of the Boers was a little bit underestimated, or maybe to a large degree underestimated, although the battle would be a very tough one on the way forward, and today we know it was a very tough one, and it's still a very tough one, and an uphill one. In Vereniging, where the peace talks between the Boers and the British were held, there was a shrine, but it's actually a huge shrine erected, showing the wounded Boer, and it says wounded but unconquered. So the first sign of them getting up again and try to rise up to this huge problematic future was the 1914, it was known as the 1914 revolt.
Right.
And we all know it was not successful at all. The famous General De La Rey was killed. He was shot at the Langlaagte roadblock. General Boers drowned in the Vaal River. And the hero, General De Wet, was arrested. So in all of those years of the Boer War, the British could never capture him, and now, ironically, he was captured by the Afrikaners. So that ended in a misery, and the Boers were once again devastated, especially General De La Rey, who was under the impression that Louis Botha, who was actually his hero, even named his son after Louis Botha. He thought that he was under the impression that Louis Botha was supporting this revolt, and when he realized it was not the case, and this is where Simon van Rensburg also came into a picture. He forecasted the death of De La Rey in very much details in his funeral and all of that. And General De La Rey was very, very much surprised by this attitude of Louis Botha, and that's where the real Boers started realizing that some of them are, well, let's call them traitors. They were really loyal to their own viewpoint, but at that time people still thought that they're all the same people. As Louis Botha and Jan Smuts both were very successful Boer generals, and they were known as Boer generals, but in fact, by heart, they were real Afrikaners to the root.
No, look, there's something I just want to touch on here. There are two families, two Afrikaner families that dominate South Africa financially today. The Oppenheimers and the Ruperts. Now, they... how did they come to South Africa? Were they part of the original group of Afrikaners and Boers who came in, or were they just people who had good contacts with the Rothschilds and said, "Hey, we're going to go and try and make a squillion here"?
Yeah, definitely both. I can just mention that Oppenheimer is South African, but Jewish descent. The father of Harry Oppenheimer was Sir Ernest Oppenheimer, and he was already active in politics and all of this before his son Harry. So definitely stems from the Rothschild influence, and also the Afrikaners. They're the same group, literally. We're doing the same things. If we, I don't want to. I would like to be careful in stating what I want to say. I would just use soft terms, but the taking out of Verwoerd was also part and parcel of the plans, because the wood didn't really go away. But we will get there when we discuss the wood in detail.
Yeah. Now,
So you're right.
okay. So is this
from
where
Rothschild and all that huge capitalism influence?
is this where the Stellenbosch mafia are based? Is this how it all sort of rose?
I would say it's very gross. Stellenbosch was known actually in the past as a Boer nationalism, core. I won't say, but what happened, what I picked up, what I noticed, was that wherever the Boers had a stronghold, they focus on that area, and they succeed every time to infiltrate that stronghold and turn the coins around.
Right.
They manage. I mentioned that the Boers are mainly very naive. They never realize what's going on, and they always say Afrikaners are actually our brothers, and we need to cooperate. And any person trying to prove the opposite are accused of being involved in polarization, and that's just not true. They just don't. We never realize what is going on.
So we're talking
of a Boer, and now it's different. It's the other way around. It's like the organization founded in 1918 called Young South Africa. Today it's a Broederbond. It was founded for the pure purpose of serving the goals and the interests of the Boer, and just the opposite happened eventually.
Yeah. So Hans, what we're talking about here is deception, and deception is a key used by people who have their own agenda. Let me put it that way. And this is prevalent right through the world today, happening right now. But getting back to the situation when it comes to the Boers and the Afrikaners, and we're talking now about the Stellenbosch mafia, and we're talking about how you had the rise of the Broederbond, and I remember I lived in Escort, and I worked at Barclays Bank, and this is back in the late 1970s, and there was a farmer who bought, or a guy who bought a few farms in wonderful areas in just in the shadow of the Drakensberg, right, beyond Loskop, going between Loskop and Champagne Castle. And they had these farms where they grew mealies or maize. And it was known that they were very, very highly placed within the Broederbond. And when they came into our bank, it was like, the king or the queen has just walked into the place. So it was crazy.
Yeah. I won't say all people who are members of a Broederbond are also Freemasons, but it's a stepping stone to Freemasonry. There's a definite link. They start with Reiterbach and then Broederbond, and it's all junior guys working their way up.
But can we just clarify, most of the people who are involved in the Broederbond are Afrikaners, they're not Boers.
Oh yeah, that's why it's called Afrikaner Broederbond,
Yeah.
It's quite obvious. Yeah. As we carry on and discuss all the prime ministers as from Botha to Botha, it's a very interesting fact that all of them were brothers. All of them.
Broederbond.
Except one prime minister was never a member of Broederbond.
Must be for Wood.
No, not at all. For Wood was a Broederbonder. In fact, it was J.G. It was, I always had this argument with people, and I couldn't prove it. I said J.G. Strydom was not a Broederbonder, and people said no, he was. Until I read the book of Professor Lindy Koorts. She's a very well-known historian at one of the universities. She wrote a book on D.F. Malan, and there I actually realized, and that's the proof which I was waiting for. She said Strydom was the only one. who was never a river bonder, only one. And a person I know quite well was involved into national intelligence before in the old regime.
Yeah.
He also told me that part of their task were to investigate the ideologies of all the prime ministers. And he also told me that Strydom was the only one who was not under the influence. I won't say they all were Freemasons. Dave Malan was a Freemason, but not Verwoerd. But Verwoerd was a Broeder. So there's not much difference. And Strydom was the only one, like I read in Lindy Koort's book, I was the only one who was not a Broeder, and that guy from National Intelligence in the previous regime informed me that Strydom was the only one who was not under the influence of the Freemasons. So he was the only pure, and that's why I call him the only real Boer Prime Minister since 1910, of the Union and the Republic later on. He was the only real Boer Prime Minister with pure Boer pensions. He also wanted to let the two Boer republics carry on again, to repair them. And Verwoerd not. Verwoerd was chasing a South African republic, and this was the biggest mistake which ever happened in this country, because that little British flag at the center was still there. And I can criticize Strydom on that. He had a few mistakes as well. He made the flag official. Was what we call the Union flag. It was actually created in 1928. He made it official in 1956, and that little British flag was still there. Because why? There were supposed to be 4 flags, because there were 4 provinces at the time.
Yeah.
But the Cape and Natal did not have a flag representing on that Union flag, which was called the Union flag. There were the 4 colors, it called it, of the ZAR and the flag of the Free State. Why were there not a flag for Natal and the Cape Province? Because they preferred to be still under Mother England.
You know, I just want to say that
was a wrong republic.
I just want to say that you think of people like P.W. Botha, who was like sort of middle of the road. Then you got this lefty F.W. de Klerk, who basically sold out South Africa. And on the other side you've got Verwoerd, who set up the homelands in South Africa, and was absolutely...
Not really.
Well,
not really. I can...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, carry on, Scott.
Go ahead. Okay, let's talk about Verwoerd.
No, I want to say, it's a fallacy to think Verwoerd was the father of apartheid to start with.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he is the father of apartheid, because the apartheid should be set up by the British.
Yeah, but first it started with the Dutch, with the pass laws against the San and the Khoisan, and then since 1908, all these laws, apartheid segregation laws, were passed, the most important ones, the most relevant ones, were passed by Verwoerd, you're quite right. But Verwoerd is known as the father of apartheid. You didn't say that, but that's a fact. People like to refer to Verwoerd as the father of apartheid. But we need to know the difference between apartheid and separate development.
Yes,
the idea of reserve was already... Yeah, that's quite. There's some common ground, but it's not really the same thing. The talks about the reserves for the black people already started in 1930 between General Herzog, who was the Prime Minister after Smuts, and Zol Plaatje. You must have heard of Zol Plaatje.
Zol Plaatje, Kimberley.
Zol Plaatje.
Yeah.
Kimberley, correct.
Yeah.
So in 1950s, General Herzog and Zol Plaatje already started discussing this idea of reserves that culminated in the homeland theory and policy. Verwoerd did not start that, but he did a pretty good job in developing the homelands and the policies around it. He was doing very well. And in 1994, with the takeover of the ANC, there were already 4, they call it the TBV states, already 4 were political independent. But very ironically, Verwoerd shot that policy. It wasn't his policy, but he was well known for development. He was very prominent in it. That's why people tend to think that he was the father of the homelands, which is not really true.
Right.
But he did a great lot in doing things right. But unfortunately, in the late 50s, there was a young professor by the name of Frikkie Tomlinson. I'm not sure if you have heard about the Tomlinson Commission.
Yep.
In the late 50s. He was tasked to do recommendations, to do proper investigation on the homelands and to make some recommendations. And I have to tell you something about Mr. Verwoerd. Well, I've read a lot of books and people who worked close together with all the prime ministers. He was quite I think he was a good guy, but I don't want to offend him in any way, but which came out is he was quite an arrogant guy. At 27 he was already a professor at university, so that gave him a bit of hard head, if I can put it that way. He did not accept any resistance against his policies and his ideas. Like we like to say in South Africa, it's my way or the highway. So when this young Professor Tomlinson came with his suggestions and recommendations, he wiped almost everything from the table. He didn't accept maybe 1 or 2 less significant recommendations. One of the most prominent recommendations which was made by Frikkie Tomlinson was that Verwoerd should send white entrepreneurs into these homelands to teach his people to do business, to look after himself. Like the saying, rather teach a white to fish himself. You know that Chinese proverb. Yeah. It was something like that. And Verwoerd also rejected that. To me, that was the most significant blunder Verwoerd ever made. Because even homelands would have been successful up to the end. They would have had no reason, the black people would have had no reason of looking to South Africa with greedy eyes. Because what reason could they have? Because they had their own successful countries where it was much more healthy for the children to grow up and develop in their own cultures. It was much more peaceful, less crime, and all these socio-economical problems we get into the township of people flocking to the townships like Sowetos, Guguletus, all these Sharpeville and all these huge townships where there was an identity problem. Because now you can realize in Nguni, we spoke about the division, the main groups, Ngunis, which always been traditionally the enemies of the Sotho. They have very different cultures at the end of the day, and all these people flocking together, there's unemployment, there's an identity problem developing, and I've been in this township, I worked there, I sold my produce from my farm, I've been in contact and have a lot of discussions with these people, and this is what is actually happening and taking place in these townships. Socio-economical problems, crime raising is a vicious circle at the end of the day. So the homeland living was much more favorable in terms of many things. But the outside world, and especially the ANC, and all these left-wing parties, and even the Eastern Bloc, the communists in those days, they were not in favor of these homelands because they wanted, that was their hidden agenda, they wanted to take over white South Africa, and they used the blacks to do that.
Hans, who was behind the assassination of Verwoerd? Because the assassination was, it's like this guy with the knife that went up and killed Verwoerd. He was almost given free access. I mean, there was no. What's the story there in your view?
I formed a view by reading a lot and gaining a lot of information, and I'm almost certain that I know what really happened. He's generally known as Dimitri Stavendas, but his actual name was Dimitrios Stavendakis. His father had the same surname. He had so many aliases. This guy was a real scoundrel. He was a Greek Lebanese crossing, born in Lorenzo Marx at the time. He was a listed communist in 13 countries. So you get a picture, I think, by now. He attempted many times to enter South Africa, and he was rejected as well. I mean, you know, they were very
how did he become such a senior person within the parliament so he had access to the president?
Okay, so he eventually slipped into the country he came by train, and the conductor, he had a list to run through of prohibited immigrants, and as you say, Staffendas, when you mention the name Staffendas, it sounds like there's an S, it starts with the S, but it actually starts with E, so he looked under the wrong alphabetical list, and so that's the way he slipped in. And even when in South Africa, he was involved in knife stabbing, a lot of crimes. He was a criminal through and through. He could even speak Russian as well. He went to Russia for a certain period, which he was actually trained in fighting and combating and all that. So he was a very well trained person and very dangerous. So your question is very relevant. How did he get into Parliament? To stab the Prime Minister in September 1966, 6th of September 1966, just after the lunch break, just after 2 o'clock. He could walk right up to the minister's bench, lean over and pretend that he was asking him something, and he took out the knife and stabbed him 4 times. 3 of those stabs were so accurate, only the one didn't go in between the ribs to touch her heart, and he was taken to a shop with a Cadillac of one of the prominent Afrikaner capitalists to buy the knife, and he received training to do that. So how did he get into Parliament? It's sensitive. I don't want to end my life this soon, so I don't know if I should tell you all the facts. It's a live stream, but
go ahead.
Yes, it's very controversial. You think I should tell you the whole story?
Absolutely.
Okay, there was a meeting held in 1964 in Parktown, in the home of one of these Jewish capitalists. I think you can guess who that was. And then they decided that. And also involved was the Afrikaner capitalist and also MI6 from England. And there, during that meeting, the decision was made that Verwoerd should be taken out and it should be an inside job. So the name of a minister, deputy minister at the time of justice was mentioned. And he had a friend when he was interned in Koffiefontein. You know, I'm not sure if you know, he was interned as an Ossewa Brandweer general. So now we have the image of a far-right Nazi-like person. In fact, while he was interned, he was visited by the father of Roo First. You remember Roo First? They were very much big-time communists. The husband was Joe Slovo.
Yeah.
So those were the people who visited this far right-wing Nazi supporter in prison. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It doesn't make sense, actually. You understand what I mean? These were the most left-wing communists.
They were crazy times. So
yeah, but giving support to a far right. You know, this is what our life has actually become. It's all so confused. We don't understand all of this.
Yeah.
This is a far-right Nazi supporter. Ossewa Brandweer, they were very much associated with Nazism. He's been interned by Smuts because he was far-right and Smuts was left. And now these far left-wing communists visit him in prison to support him. So that should tell us about conspiracies and things we do not understand. So that was just his background. And while he was interned, he met this mate of him, his lifelong mate, by the name of Lang Hendrik van der Berg. You should know who that is, the tall assassin, as he was called later. So, and that was this. Now you should get the picture at this meeting during in 1964 in the house of this Jewish capitalist. It was decided they need to do this as an inside job. And now these persons were mentioned. These persons I was just discussing, and Lang Hendrik van den Berg was part of them. And we actually recruited this Dimitrios Staffendakis. We recruited him in for that job, and we all knew what followed. We all knew what happened eventually. Verwoerd was stabbed and taken out, and within a week, the whole investigation was under the carpet. Staffendakis was declared insane, and that's it. Nobody did anything later on to really find out how Verwoerd was killed and why he was taken out. So that's the story.
So even though Verwoerd was on the Broederbond side of things, he was taken out by people who were in that area.
Yeah, because Verwoerd didn't go all the way. He was very similar to Hitler. He was financed by the Jewish capitalists. They gave him money, like they say, Jews giving Hitler money to kill Jews and to prosecute Jews.
Yeah.
But if you don't go all the way, like do and drive the agenda all the way, they take you out. So that is exactly. Verwoerd was called to London after Stradom's death, and he was given a blueprint. You have to realize now that little Union Jack flag was still on our flag. So they still have a foot in the door, and they still wanted to control from the outside. And now that was why, if you look at what happened with D.F. Malan, he was also a Mason, although he was considered very, far right. He was considered a far right nationalist, which he doesn't really. He never really was that. As Stradom and him had a lot of differences. So when he decided he was too old, he doesn't want to carry on. He wants to pass on his duties to someone else. His choice fell on Klasie Havenga. I'm not sure if you have heard of Klasie Havenga.
No,
he was the leader of the Afrikaner Party.
Right.
Again, the name says it, Afrikaner Party. So the election in 48, where the nationalists defeated the SAPE, the Verenigde Party, the United at the time, they could not do that without the assistance and the support and to merge with this Afrikaner Party. And Klasie Havenga was also a Freemason. So Malan knew that Stradom was earmarked to follow him. And he didn't like that because, as I said, Stradom was the only one, including Verwoerd, who was not a Broederbonder and who was not a Freemason, and the influence of the Freemasons. So Malan did his best to push Klasie Havenga in that position. And he waited until Stradom went to, in those days we did not have all these technologies to communicate like we can today. So Stradom was out of the country, he went to London, and then Malan was very opportunistic and he tried to push the caucus to get Klasie Havenga elected.
Wow.
So this is always been done, even within this National Party of 48 to 66, which we would have thought was a very close trio of conservatism.
Well, look,
and it was actually not.
I just want to move on to what happened in the late 1970s when the various homelands were established by South Africa, much to the ire of countries like Britain and the United States. They said this is bullshit, you can't do that. And I actually worked in a little town called Ikopo, which is in the southern part of KZN. And it's quite close to the Umzimkhulu River. But you go over the Umzimkhulu River and there's a town called Umzimkhulu. And I used to work at the bank agency at Umzimkhulu. That's what I did. Monday to Friday, I'd be there, and I'd be, dispensing cash and taking in cash, and what happened was when South Africa declared the homelands,
Yes.
all of a sudden everything changed. Because I had a British passport. And because I had a British passport, that was a problem. When I actually went across into the customs office at Amzimkulu with a newly formed Transkei, I had to go and get my passport stamped before I could actually go through, because I was not South African, and because Britain did not recognize South Africa with the homelands.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a day after day after day, there was this one really obnoxious guy. Okay, now this is where he came horribly unstuck, because it was an African fella who's obviously just put in there because they set up their homeland and excuse me. He every day he used to put me through heck, going through, and because I had a British passport, I didn't have a South African passport. And
Yes.
where this guy came unstuck was, I mean, this is what really struck me, was that the ability not to think forward. He had to come into my bank agency. You could see I was from Barclays Bank. He had to come into my bank agency to go and cash his check and to draw cash.
Yeah.
Well, guess what happened when he did that? Instead of spending 20 minutes in a long queue, because that's when these people have been paid by, funnily enough, the South African taxpayer, even though they had their own little homeland, he spent 3 hours in different queues, because I made sure that his experience coming to the bank was not going to be a happy one. And when he eventually got to the front of the queue and he was drawing his cash, I said to him, "Mate, we can play this game, or we can come to some sort of compromise." And at that time, I was a numismatist. I was working. I was actually working with the Afrikaners, who had a huge enterprise in that part of Transkei. And I used to come through there during the evenings on Wednesdays and over the weekends to have a chat to them and look at documents and stuff like that. And of course, every time I came through, I had the same shit, where I was pulled into the customs office, and I had my... I've got a passport that's got about 1,000 Amzimkulu stamps on it. I mean, I've still got the bloody thing, because of the whole situation. But what happened was that after spending 3 hours trying to get some money, and he suddenly realized, shit, Houston, I have a problem now, because this teller, this guy from Ikopo, who's a Brit, is giving me shit. I've been giving him shit for all this time, but all of a sudden he's giving me shit. So as I was actually paying him, I said, look, we can play this game. I can make your life hell if you want to draw cash, because this is where you're going to draw your cash from. Or you can make my life a whole lot better coming through customs. And all of a sudden it was like a bing, the light globe went on. And I said to him, I said, look, how about we have a little password? And this is not a story. This is what actually happened. So I said to him, how about when I come through, and I had a little mini miner at the time, and I said, how about when I come through, if you hear the word, or you tell your staff, if they hear the word bank, they just say, go through, without all the bullshit of having your passport stamped and waiting in queues and stuff. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
I used to go through there 10 o'clock at night, and I'd say, bank. Oh, go! Because they were scared they were going to upset the guy who headed up the customs office. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because when you look at the actual ramifications of what happened at that time, because Britain and because no other country accepted the homelands that Verwoerd brought in,
For sure,
for someone who wasn't a South African, it was hell, because you were put through this whole thing. But as I said, I bypassed that because this guy, when he came into the bank after that, he would just walk to the front of the queue and I'd say, hello, I've forgotten what his name was. I'd say hello, and he would go to the front and I'd pay him out. And, so it was like something that worked well for both of us. And he looked after me and I looked after him. But the ramifications of that homeland policy were huge in so many different areas.
Yeah, I also in those days I visited many of these homelands in the times in the old regime when it was still the Republic of South Africa under white control, and those were the homelands. I've been to 20 African countries. I've done work in 20 African countries. So wherever you go, there's always, like we call, politics. That's why I'm saying I've never voted in my life. I've never voted for any politician. Because politics means games, and so everyone is playing his own game according to his own viewpoint and from his own angle.
Yeah.
But eventually, when you get to know the people by heart, there's always prejudice against skin and where you come from and who you are, until you really get to know the people. And I've been having very good times in all through Africa. I've been to 20 countries, as I'm saying, and nowhere. There's only one country where I really felt not welcome, and that was the DRC. And I always went into the history of all the countries.
The DRC is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a complete basket case.
Yeah, the ex-Belgium Congo, like it's called Belgium Congo. And I don't agree with most of these accusations against whites in Africa, what the conduct was, and was it bad or good? I think it's mostly exaggerated. But in the Congo, after I've read the history of King Leopold, I'm not sure if you know about him and what the Belgians did in the DRC. I can still understand why the people are not positive towards white people, because if you read those stories, which were really horrible, this King Leopold was just a monster. So you understand that. So it all depends on, and it will differ in each and every country, and for that sake also the homelands, the experience and the stories there. But eventually, like you said, it seems that you sorted that situation out very quickly with that guy and you got to terms. I won't say there's any real general antagonism against white people all over Africa. They treat me as a hero wherever I go. But there are exceptions, like in the DRC, I felt there's always this hostile feelings again. You can't even make jokes with it. They don't like you just because you're white. And when I read the history of Belgium and realized what really went on there, I could understand that. I could understand it, because wrong is still wrong and right is still right. And King Leopold did terrible things there. The Belgians, which I never expected to be like that. I always thought it was a peaceful nation, and I still think it is, but the specific leader of Belgium, he messed up big time in the DRC.
Well, look, colonialism was just bad. I mean, you just look at South Africa, what the British did to the Boers. I mean, because of gold. If there had been no gold found on the Witwatersrand, the British would never have done what they did in 1899. It was all about
and that's
money.
Because the black people of South Africa, they think that they have been under colonialism, which and actually was the Boers who suffered the most under colonialism.
Yeah,
If you look at the real figures, they don't realize that. It was us who suffered the most.
You know, if you look at the Boer history, they're probably one of the most oppressed people ever in the history of mankind. I have absolutely no question about that. And their fighting spirit, and it's tragic to see that fighting spirit seems to be disappearing at the moment, because they've got to stand up.
But we will get up again if we get to the truth. You know, the truth will always set you free.
Yeah.
And this is why I appreciate you allowing me on your live stream in an attempt, as I said, just to get the record straight and to paint a better picture. It's always like my version, your version, and in between lies the truth. But I think the picture was too much distorted towards the side of the Boers, and this hidden facts and history is totally covered and distorted in such a way that we are the villains. We seem to be the villains in it all, and we were actually not. We actually saved, for instance, the many Sotho tribes from the extinction by the Nguni's. We actually saved them, but the different picture is portrayed as if we forced them out and we killed them, and that's totally not the truth. The only black group which was forced, and we discussed it before, out of a certain area was the Matadeli, and they did not belong where they were. They were intruders, they were traitors, they were tyrants. Mr. Nkatsi Kumalo, as you know, he was a traitor. This effect of interest, which we did not discuss the previous time, I failed to mention. You mentioned Moffat, the father-in-law of Dr. David Livingstone. Mr. Nkatsi, he was the only one who was allowed in his area. Was Moffat. He allowed Moffat, Mr. Nkatsi. He for some way, he liked Moffat. Just for the sake of interest, I didn't mention previously. But Mr. Nkatsi, and like we said, with the aid of Botswana and the aid of Agrikwa, it was a joint force. It wasn't a matter of white people driving out black people. It was a matter of white people as a core force with the aid of Botswana and the Agrikwa. They drove this intruder, this tyrant, out of a country where he was actually killing and murdering people, terrorizing them. So that's a whole different story.
Yeah. No, look, I totally get that. Now, I want to move forward from 1948, when the National Party basically took over power in South Africa, even though it was like still a vassal state of the British Empire. And if we move forward to the late 1980s, the early 1990s, that's where things become particularly disturbing, because you had P.W. Botha, who was the Prime Minister, and then he was kind of unseated by this guy F.W. de Klerk, who was very tied up with the Broederbond, and probably with the Freemasons as well. What can you tell us about that? Because here again we're talking about not the Boers, we're talking about Afrikaners who are now taking over the control of the country.
Yes. You mentioned 1948, that there were actually three parts of the National Party. The first one was in 1924 up to 1932, when General Herzog was the Prime Minister. When he came to power, the National Party came into power in 1924. The Boers eventually thought that this is our political home now. And Herzog did very well at the start, but eventually he was lured into a merge with Skellamjani Smuts, as Paul Kruger used to call him. He never trusted him. He called him Skellamjani. And he showed his slyness by luring Herzog into a pact government in 1932 because of the conditions in the country. It was depression, it was drought and all of that. And he just outplayed Herzog. Herzog was not clever enough for Skellamjani. So this was the first National Party. The second one, I said it was the same party in essence, but with different viewpoints and policies. 1948 to 1966, also always considered as the real conservative and the fathers of apartheid, which is not actually true. They inherited apartheid because Jannie Smuts' party, all the way, they were practicing apartheid with the British, with the aid of the British all the time.
Yeah.
These signboards saying "slechts blankes, only whites." When the National Party came into power in 1948, they took those signboards from the sub government offices. They were all involved in apartheid all the time. So it's not a matter of now accusing the National Party since 1948 as being the fathers of apartheid. That's really nonsense. They inherited that, and they're trying to save grace and to save the situation by moving it into separate development. So to decentralize the people into the homelands and to keep a focus on socio-economical problems within South Africa, which I mentioned. Inside the township, problem of identity and this vicious circle with crime rising, unemployment rising, and so forth. But now people have the idea that this era of the National Party was all conservative, which in fact was also not really true, because as I mentioned, nobody would have thought that D.F. Malan was a broederbonder and a Mason. Nobody in the wildest imagination would have thought that. So, you see how sly the Afrikaner is in playing the role, putting masks on their faces. And even Verwoerd never spoke about Boers in his speeches. Strydom did that, because Strydom had the idea of restoring the Boer republics. Verwoerd not, because Verwoerd was no Boer, he was born in Holland. He had no Boer sentiment at all. It doesn't he doesn't come through in any of his speeches. So I just wanted to point that out. And then we came to the last era of the National Party with from John Foster, who I actually mentioned as being a traitor as well, because he was, even in his time as Minister of Justice, he smuggled cigarettes into the communists, the prisoners. He smuggled cigarettes into prison for them. So he was with them all the time. He played a double role. That's why he was also instrumental in creating the AWB in as early as 1973.
That was
and he was the one. Yeah, it was not the branch at all. That's what people think. It was John Foster's secret police under the authority of Young.
Ter Blanche was the guy who, after 1994, ran the AWB.
No, he ran the AWB, but it didn't originate. He was actually
I get that. Yeah.
He was supposed to be a very far right-wing organization, but notice the name. It's Afrikaner Weerstandbeweging, not Boere Weerstandbeweging.
Yes,
you understand?
Yes,
you do not read between the lines. So he was also playing a double role, just as John Foster did. John Foster knew how to play this double role. That's why he recruited Ter Blanche, the orator, the guy who can speak and rise people up.
Yes.
He was planted there. He was actually abused, and I spoke to Ter Blanche many times in my life as well. But we can discuss that another day. He was no Boer at all, but he was portraying the role of Boer. He messed it up with all his misconduct, and then that was the image which people had of a Boer. Like a type of bearded scoundrel doing very, very bad things and having a bad character. And this was characterizing the Boer, which is not true at all. Just before we finish today, I just want to read a couple of comments by the British about the Boers, and those were the real Boers. The real Boers are the ones who vowed to guard at Blood River. They were in need, in fear, and without. That's the character of a Boer, not a Ter Blanche like, And this is how the Afrikaner goes, that is their conduct. That is the way they operate. They use people like Ter Blanche. It's just one example, but it's a very good example, to mess up the image of a Boer. And that is what people thought about Boers. Big belly, bearded, using rude words, drinking, and this is exactly what he did. But anyhow, I don't want to get into people's characters. It's just an example of what the Afrikaners' way of thinking and their conduct is. That is their methodology to achieve their goal. to make the war out as
sorry, Hans, something we haven't actually addressed is F.W. de Klerk. I mean, his move at that pivotal time when you had Henry Kissinger coming down and saying to South Africa, you've got to bring in a democracy and so on. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to get back to John Foster, we discussed it, but when you mentioned earlier during this session that P.W. Botha was like somewhere not, you didn't really thought of him as either being very liberal or very conservative.
Well, Botha was a guy who said that a black government could never run a country because they didn't have the...
Yeah, he said all those things. Yeah, he said all those things. But there's something of interest about P.W. Botha. Straight on, kept the National Party pure. He did his best. He was friends. They were dining together with families with P.W. Botha, but he never appointed him. Very interesting. He kept the parties pure. That's why when he handed the stick over to Verwoerd, well, he died, but when Verwoerd took over from him, Verwoerd received a very purified party. And when Verwoerd died, when he was murdered in 1966, about 85% of the National Party was broederwonders and Freemasons. So Verwoerd, that's something very, very much wrong, and people do not realize that. Because soon after then, Verwoerd came into power, and Verwoerd's favorite saying was, verwarder Verwoerd. He was actually the enemy of Verwoerd, and people don't realize that. He hated Verwoerd, and nobody knew that. When Foster came out of prison, when he was interned in Koffiefontein, he was in prison for 6 years. It was a very bad, hellish time for him. He described that in his biography. And he had political aspirations all the time. He was a very intelligent, good speaker, and he could reason very well. So he had serious political aspirations. But at that time, Verwoerd was the editor of the Transvaal, the newspaper. And he, for some reason, maybe because he was an Ossewa Brandwag, because also, contrary to what people think, Nansing Verwoerd did not support the Ossewa Brandwag, really. They actually did not want their members to be part of the Ossewa Brandwag. So that could be the reason, because John Foster had strong Ossewa Brandwag ties. So now he was like shooting Foster down in his paper, writing against him, all the articles. And that resulted in Foster missing that constituency. He lasted with a few votes, and that is why he did not like Verwoerd at all. So you can dive a connotation later on with what I told you, what took place later on with Verwoerd being killed, and he was involved in all of that. It's very clear. But P.W. Botha also, he was appointed by Verwoerd. There was a first attempt on Verwoerd's life in 1916 by David Pratt. He was a labor union leader. If the Rand used to show, about that, he was shot. So that was the first attempt to Verwoerd's life. And he never sharpened any security. Like, we all asked the question, how did Dimitrios Safendakis got appointed in Parliament? Because Verwoerd was asleep all the time. He didn't realize all his enemies close to his chest. And that's why he was killed.
Wow.
And he didn't keep the party pure as Stradom did. P.W. Botha was Stradom's close friend, but Stradom was a man of principle. So he never appointed P.W. Botha for that reason. But Verwoerd came and he appointed. Also a couple of liberal guys like Dennis Warrell. So Verwoerd started appointing these guys with liberal ideas. P.W. Botha was known as one of the liberals of Kieron Street. Now, if you have ever visited Parliament, I'm not sure if you've been there in Cape Town. Yes. I did a visit once.
Yes,
there's a short little cul-de-sac.
Yes.
So you have been there. There's a short little cul-de-sac called
There's a Freemasons little building at the back.
Yes, also. And these liberal guys within the National Party, the left side of the National Party, they used to gather at that Keeromstraat hotel. There was a hotel there with a nice restaurant, and during lunchtimes they gathered there, and there they were brewing all these, their concerns, and they were actually undermining the guys like Malan, which appeared to be conservative, and Strauman for good. So they were opposing these guys all the time. So he was on the left side of the National Party, P.W. Botha. It's only when later he wasn't that keen to release Mandela. He was bearing his feet. He was not really in any hurry to do that, and that is why FW eventually forced him out. FW and his cronies forced him out of the National Party and the leadership. But he was, all the time, he was on the left side. He was never really on the right-hand side. This is P.W. Botha.
Sorry, Hans, what you're saying is that since basically 1948, politics in South Africa has been run by the Afrikaner side of the agenda. In other words, the Proto-Afrikaner, the Kaapse-Afrikaner. So basically, right through to 1994, the Boers were kind of left out of the picture because of politics.
Altogether. Except, like I mentioned, for Strauman.
Except for Strauman, yeah. Except for Strauman. I get that, yeah.
So when Strauman became Prime Minister, there was hope again, because Malan was a hybrid. He was an Afrikaner in disguise. And so was Verwoerd, really. And Strauman was the only one. He was called the Lion of the North. He was a fighter. He's still known today as the most pure Prime Minister with the most pure principles, but unfortunately his health didn't last. He was also knocked to his health in 1919 already with the Spanish flu. He had to learn to walk again and all of that. And when they split from the National Party in 1932, when Herzog surprised them, they were actually astonished. They surprised all of these guys by joining forces with Smuts, because Smuts was really the one. Him and Botha, he was most well-known real Afrikaner traitors, and they were stunned. And so Strauman was the only, although he came from the Cape, he became known as the Lion of the North. So he was the only parliamentary member in the Transvaal, and then that newly formed purified National Party was poor. They had no money. All the funds and everything went with Herzog to Smuts, to what they called the Verenigde Partij at the time, the United Party. And so Strauman worked very hard to build up to the 1948 victory to get support, and that also gave him a knock on his health. So he didn't even last a full 4 years. So that was the last hope we had, and he was gone. It was Verwoerd again, like a hybrid. Verwoerd started to turn things towards what we have today, and Foster even speeded it up. And then came P.W. Botha. He tried to resist a little bit, just because they resisted his methodology, and he was too slow in their opinion. So then he changed all of a sudden. He's conservative. It's the same like Connie Mulder. I'm sure you've heard of a guy like Connie Mulder.
I remember him well. Now look, I'm going to wrap up this live stream shortly, but we're going to have another one, because this is such fascinating history. I want to go back to the image I'm sharing with you, because I am in this chart here. I'm one of the underblankers, the other whites. I actually came to South Africa. I came to South Africa from East Africa because my parents were from the United Kingdom. So I don't fit into this whole thing. How have the other whites blended into what is really an Afrikaner Boer history?
It's also not, there's no black and white, there's grey areas as well. It depends from your background. I would dare to give any percentage of, but surprisingly, many of these other blankes, other whites, like you for instance, feel the same, feel close to the Boers, and many other.
I do. I feel a tremendous affinity with the Boers. I do.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I just do.
You know, the origin of this Boer nation is called the nation of Wel, the Verloftevolk.
Yeah.
It was at Blood River.
Yes.
So I want to take you back there. Within that lager, there were not only Boers, there were roughly 470 Boers. There were also 200, like they call tame Zulu. I'm not sure if you know that. You are aware of it.
And they have cattle there as well. I mean, it's amazing what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of English guys, like the interpreter Halstead was an English guy. We were about 6 English persons and also a couple of colours. So what I want to get to is they all associated them with the Boers. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been in that lager, even the 200 tame Zulu.
Yeah.
So they were also protected by, they didn't fight, they were just there. And they didn't take part in the Wel as well. I'm not sure for what reason, but they were there. So they associated themselves with the Boers. So many of these other blankes, they associate themselves with the Boers, and we consider them in spirit as part of us. So it depends, there are differences, many others, but my experience lately is that more and more as they see things transpiring in South Africa and whereas ANC is taking the country too, and you know they've been influenced and brainwashed, and a lot of negative propaganda through the decades against the Boers, so they were influenced by that, but now that they see the truth and really see what the nature of these communist ANC people are and where they're taking the country, they're getting enlightened. So that's all I can say on that. It's difficult for me to say percentage-wise how many are on our side and how many not. But surprisingly, I experienced lately that there's a lot of them on our side, especially lately, in they realizing what is going on.
Well, look,
and we appreciate.
I just want to wrap up this live stream, but before I do, I've been privy to video footage of Nelson Mandela wearing a Masonic tunic, actually being put around his shoulders, a Freemasonry type thing. Do the Freemasons actually run South Africa? Because they seem to be involved at every level.
Yeah, they use these guys as puppets. They've got a hidden agenda. We all know with it all, like the Order of Malta, for instance, Freemasonry in Scotland, which the Queen was here, and she was very much involved with Mandela. All of these people in control are Freemasons, so that's the story. There's no question about it. And I want to later, if we have another session after this on the same topic, I would like to discuss FW. He was the most instrumental he's actually the cousin of my mother. Luckily not blood related, just married to a family. So I can tell you a lot about him and his father. His father was appointed by J.D. Strydom. J.D. Strydom was also his uncle because he married F.W. de Klerk's aunt.
Wow.
And J.D. Strydom was my mother's uncle. So I'm related to blood related.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Hans. I'm going to take you up on that. We're going to have another live streams talking about F.W. de Klerk and J.G. Strydom. That's going to be the whole topic for the discussion, okay? So, look,
very interesting facts which come out there as well.
Yeah, look, this is stuff we need to get out there because this is part of South African history that we don't want to lose.
Yes, and most people are unaware of this, and that, people say you can't live in the past, but you need to take a backside before we can make. If you driving a vehicle, there's a little mirror, rear mirror, showing you the rear view. Small, but it's there. The window in front of you, the windscreen is much bigger. So yes, we should look forward as well, but we cannot go forward if we don't take a backside and see what happened in the past. We learn from the past, the good and the bad, and then take a decision and have a much better future. But people don't want to do that. They don't like to hear the truth. They don't like to look into the past. And then you would never be able to have a proper future, well designed and well thought through.
Yeah, look, I totally get it. Hans, thank you so much. This is part 2 of our discussions about the history of South Africa, and your insight and your knowledge is amazing. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott, and again, thanks for the privilege. It's really my privilege, and I'm very thankful.
And look, I'll get Marlena to contact you to set up another discussion where we will talk about Mr. F.W. de Klerk, the guy who brought South Africa into democracy, and also J.G. Strydom. So we might start with Strydom and then move on to de Klerk from there.
Yeah, I think because I think Strydom was the one mostly neglected.
Yeah.
It's well known fact that he was mostly neglected because he was not considered as a politician, but as a leader. The left-wing British press at the time, when he was Prime Minister, they said, but this man is no politician. Rightly so, he was not. He was a leader of his people.
Yeah.
And that is what we needed.
Yeah. All right, buddy. You have a good evening. Well, it's morning time, your time. It's sort of like getting close to sort of evening time, my time. But look, great chatting. This is pre-recorded. It'll be going live later this week, and we will have another live stream with my guest, Hans. And we will be talking about F.W. de Klerk, and I think the operative term we need to, or adjective we need to add to that is traitor, the word traitor. Because, when we talk about de Klerk, we talk about the Broederbond. There are a number of things that happen there which really destroyed South Africa as a first world nation, and we need to unpack that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think traitor is a good description. Nothing less than that will suit.
Yeah. All right, Hans, thank you, and chat to you again soon.
Thank you very much. All of the best, and I'm looking forward.
Okay, mate. Take care. Bye for now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, guys, that was Hans, and we were talking about parts of South African history that a lot of people don't really understand. And, the deception of big business and what goes on behind the scenes. We see now playing out with Agenda 2030 and the New World Order and the World Economic Forum, and they're not conspiracy theories, they are history unfolding. Thank you to the moderators for looking after the side chat, and have a great evening. And don't forget, next week, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we will have a live stream again. In fact, you can see the live streams for next week already on Loving Life TV's homepage. And I do apologize about the sound quality, in particular mine, and the second part of that recording. I'm just going to have to work on that, but it doesn't happen very often, but I'm not sure why it happens. But anyway, here we're going to go out with Hier bly ek boer. Have a great evening, guys. Bye for now.
Meer as 61,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg, hier is ek boer. Stop is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. So diep in die nacht sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek voor. Soos blaassam in die somer wat vreugde bring, my oupa wat maniekie kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels leek diep in die grond geplant. My siel soos my pa los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my sweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek voor. Die leeu sal kom, 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 die leeu sal kom.